prossima presentazione verrà fatta invece da Claire Stocks e Maurizio Amoroso. Claire Stocks è Senior Lecturer in Literary Culture and Heritage all'Università di Amsterdam, dove si occupa in particolare di letteratura flavia. Proprio questi suoi interessi l'hanno portata a curare una mostra sull'imperatore Domiziano che si è tenuta al Museo Nazionale dell'Antichità di Leida nel 2021-2022 e a coinvolgere Maurizio Amoroso, fondatore di Entertainment Game Apps, nella creazione di un gioco digitale che fosse fruibile in mostra, ma anche sviluppabile successivamente in modo indipendente, come avremo modo di scoprire oggi. So I leave the floor to Claire and with the participation of Maurizio. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Aurora. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here today, and my apologies for delivering this in Italian, and for the fact that I can't, sorry, not Italian, but in English. An excellent beginning, and for the fact that I can't speak Italian, but thankfully two of my co-collaborators, one online, my dear colleague Aurora, Raimondi, Cominesi, and my other dear colleague MAURIZIO, AMOROSO, are both Italian and therefore can field questions in Italian for you if you have any. And Marta has also very kindly offered to help with any Italian to English for me. Now, today I'd like to talk to you about, well, the one big theme, which is Domitian, and making games about the Emperor Domitian. And I'll say a little bit more about him in a moment. But also about two games that we have developed on the back of an exhibition that first started life 5+ years ago in terms of its development and has now been completed. And we're now thinking about the legacy of that project and where we want to go with our gaming going forwards. So today the title of this is Mastering Gods of the Hunt for Domitian, Gaming in Ancient Rome. And that title, Mastering Gods, for anyone who knows about it, let me talk about Domitian first, shall I? There we go. So did anyone in the room actually know who Domitian is, other than Maurizio and Samantha and my just no, that's what I thought. So the Emperor Domitian was one of the Flavian emperors, the last Flavian emperor, and he ruled Rome from 81 to 96 AD. And the Flavians were in Rome from 69 to 96 AD. And we, as in myself and Aurora, were involved in the curatorship of an exhibition that took place in Leiden and then moved to the Capitoline Museum in Rome on this emperor. And alongside this, we wanted to develop a game. And by coincidence, Aurora had introduced me to Maurizio, and we worked together on developing a game that could work as an educational learning device that was also supposed to be fun alongside the exhibition. And we're now in phase 2 of this game development all these years later, where having first developed a game for that exhibition in Leiden, what we now want to do and what we have done is develop a game that can be played in the city of Rome itself, and that will be played on phones, that is free to use, but also that allows you to traverse Rome as it is today without necessarily having to enter any archaeological site that you need to pay for. So one of the things, and we'll talk more about this, is this idea of community heritage and the way in which we as individuals living in an environment can engage with the heritage that's all around us, just on the street, effectively. So first off, phase 1, we had this exhibition. It was called God on Earth, Emperor Domitian, and it took place in the Dutch National Museum of Antiquity in Leiden. This, you'll probably guess by the date, also suffered as a result of COVID. It was postponed by more than a year in the first instance. And I'm actually looking at Barbara because whilst Barbara wasn't involved in the game here, she did lend some very beautiful objects to the exhibition from Vindolanda. Because as you mentioned, Barbara, Vindolanda obviously had that Flavian overlap in its creation. And this was an exhibition that was curated by Aurora, by myself, and by two wonderful colleagues of ours in the Netherlands, Eric Norman and Natalie de Haan. It was pretty huge, 800 square meters. We had more than 300 objects, 29 lenders as well. It was one of the museum's biggest exhibitions. And Aurora can talk more concretely about any aspects of that if you would like to know more about the exhibition itself. Everything okay? Good. In terms of the visuals and stuff, let me just give you a little sample of what it looked like, because we tried to reflect this sort of atmosphere in some of the games that in the game that we were creating. So we had some beautiful objects that related to Domitian on the right of the screen. It's on the right of my screen. It's on the right of your screen too. You can actually see that we had we were involved in a competition where we had an AI company in the Netherlands design an AI version of the Emperor Domitian, who would look very ominously at you from behind his statue there. And we used one of the key things that we wanted to do in this exhibition, because we have so much material from this period, was not just to look at material culture, but to look at literature alongside that, so that we would take those stories from that period to tell us something about the culture itself, and then we wanted to put all of that in the game. So the idea was that we would have a game that was narrative based, using literary sources from the ancient world, using some of these objects. And here, just another little sort of visual of the exhibition itself and some of these wonderful objects that we had there. So the first game, which was developed again in partnership, because I used to be at Newcastle University before I moved to the University of Amsterdam. So this is why Newcastle features very prominently here. The Rijksmuseum was also a partner in the development of this game, Dutch National Museum of Antiquities, and Entertainment Games Limited with Maurizio, but also Samantha, who I must give credit to as well. And this was the first, I think this was our first piece of artwork that was developed for the game. Yeah, I've got that right. So it is our first piece of artwork for the game. And you see here, phase one on the left, and this is phase two that I'm going to talk about later, where we are now. So with phase one, we actually had two aspects of it. We had two levels to the game. Now, initially, before COVID hit, the intention had been for the story-based part of the game with 3D representation to be played itself in Rome, where you would go and visit the sites, and then you would see 3D reconstructions of those sites, and you would play this story-based game on those sites. But then COVID hit, and we actually turned it into a game that you could play sitting at home. So it became play in ancient Rome or play in the museum, effectively, here. And in the backdrop, you can see all of the characters who we had featuring in this story. And then in addition to having this sort of play in ancient Rome game, which was also a mystery, was who killed the Emperor Domitian. Because one of the things about the Emperor Domitian is that he was assassinated in 96 AD. And according to our literary sources, it was a plot at the highest level, with the Roman Senate involved, possibly even Domitian's wife, the people who were closest to him. And it had clearly been planned for a while, because within 24 hours, we had a new emperor in Rome. There was already one that was lined up to replace him. So the story of that first game is essentially the 24 hours leading up to Domitian's death. And we follow characters through as they try to discover who kills Domitian. And then on the exhibition level, we wanted to create a game that used the same graphics, but allowed people to play it in the exhibition itself, in the exhibition space. And Maurizio tells me that this was something that's not really been, you hadn't ever worked on something like that before, where you had an exhibition and a standalone game that were meant to tie in so completely with one another. And then with phase two, it's an actual walking tour, as I mentioned, through the city of Rome. So first off, I'll tell you a little bit more about phase one and how we're getting to where we are now. The murder mystery game, Who Killed Domitian? Here are some of the wonderful graphics that Maurizio and his team created for us. We had various stopping points. I think, I'm trying to remember now actually how many points we had in total. It was between 8 and 10. And for each stopping point, we had a reconstruction in 3D of the ancient city of Rome. But actually, Maurizio created such a beautiful landscape of Rome that it wasn't just a 3D place where you had a building and then a flat expanse in the software. He actually recreated the entire city for us in 3D, so that you could, almost like a drone above it, could zone in on any part of the city if you wanted to. This made for beautiful graphics. It also made for a very heavy game, which is one of the reasons why in phase two we've moved to a much lighter game in terms of downloads, etc. So who killed Domitian? So the story ran through both parts of the game, including if you wanted to play it in the museum, but it was much more narrative based and much more linear in the first game in terms of that narrative. The characters, we had two characters because we wanted, of course, budget was always an aspect. And for this, we also had a relatively low budget. We had the money that Newcastle University put into the project, but Entergaming Games also provided a huge amount of in-kind support through their time. And Maurizio and Samantha both put many hours into developing this game. And I remember this because there was one point where they were working on it and they'd come to Newcastle and there was a storm outside. And so they holed up in the hotel and basically all night while the trees were collapsing around them, they developed this game for us. So we're very grateful. So we want to give these characters a backdrop. We also wanted them to reflect the diversity of Rome as a city. Because this is quite a hot topic certainly in my discipline of classics now, about how do we show the diversity of the ancient Roman period. So Christmas, we had him being a student of the poet Martialis. We had him born in Rome in an equestrian family, but we originally had him come from Batavia. And then on the right here, we had Creste, and she's a hairdresser of the imperial family. We thought we'd give her that backdrop so that she had insight into what was happening in the palace. She is a Roman citizen, daughter of a freed woman, and we had her come originally from North Africa in terms of her ethnicity. And her brother Faustus is another character that features in the game as a horse trainer. Then this is the map that was part of the user interface that allowed you to see where you were moving about the ancient city, even though you were sitting in your living room playing on the phone or wherever you wanted to play. And with each new location, we had mini games that the user had to complete in order to allow them to move the story forward and to solve another part of the mystery. And Maurizio's golden rule for this was that it had to be a game that could be played within a minute or two so that you didn't lose the attention of the user for those mini games. One thing that we also learnt, I in particular, is, so this slide doesn't show too much text in terms of a script, but I did get carried away with writing too much of a story. And so this is something that we're learning for, what I'm learning for the future, because for me, I love the storytelling aspect of a game. But we always have to think, of course, as you are all aware of, is it fun to play? And so fun first, and then the story comes alongside. This is something I'm still working on. So we have our character Creste there. She starts off in Domitian's palace, and I just had to say something like, Jupiter, this place is beautiful. It's I'm going to win a Pulitzer. It's great stuff, great stuff. Then here we have one of the little mini games where you can see that the user has to put the image of one of the statues back together. And this was based on a statue head portrait that we actually had in the exhibition. So we tried to use, if we used objects, material culture, we tried to use objects that were actually featuring in the exhibition. And then other mini games would be word puzzles based upon ancient texts and stories. And this one here, we're starting with our character Creste is talking to one of Domitian's servants, and she's told that he's been given a prophecy that foretells his death, basically. So we start from the very beginning with this idea that we're building up to the death of Domitian. And then as the game proceeds, what happens is that Creste meets different characters who give her different bits of information. And we have that interesting juxtaposition between the fact of, if you have a player who knows about the life of Domitian, they will know that he dies because he's already dead in the past, but our characters don't know that. So that's an interesting layer to the game in terms of user knowledge and what they know versus what the characters know. Do they go on the same journey as the characters, or do they have prior information? Completing puzzles that also guide you through the city, and other puzzles as well involving just, can you identify gods? So the idea is that you try and learn little bits of information as you go. And we also built in facts into the game so that if you wanted to, there was always the opportunity to go back to the main menu to learn more about what you had just seen. We built those sort of facts into the game. And then with the exhibition level, we tried to map the same themes, the same stops that had appeared in that narrative-based game onto the themes of the exhibition. So we had the same points, and the same number of points. The only difference here is that rather than playing in a linear fashion, for practical reasons, our users had to be able to go to any point they wanted to at any moment in the game. They only had to start at one place and finish at one place, but the way they went there was up to them. This was done for practical reasons, simply that we couldn't have a situation where, let's say in a dream world, you've got 100 people wanting to play the game at the same time. We couldn't have them all in the same place at the same time. So we had to have freedom of movement. And what you see here represents the exhibition space and the different rooms of the exhibition. We reutilized the same graphics. So we had the same choice of characters that you can follow around. The backdrops were the same. All that would happen is that you had the choice to go to a different part of the exhibition, and that when you then got to the exhibition space itself, you would see on your phone a question relating to an object in that exhibition space. And here, for example, it's, can you see the head of Domitian, this one here in the photo in the background, from the museum in Naples? Take a closer look, and then you're asked to answer a question. The armor the statue is wearing, it's called a cuirass. Can you see what creature is on it? And then you have to work out which creature it is. And then you get some information that's not contained in the exhibition itself about that object and its history. We also had an Egyptian section. And we had in the game that you can play in Rome, our characters go to the Temple of Isis. And so this was a nice opportunity to, when we asked that question about something relating to Egypt, to show the backdrop of the Temple of Isis that had also been designed for us in 3D by Maurizio and his team. So this then were the two games that we had running in parallel, that then when we get to that final point, we wanted to try and build in ways in which the user could give us feedback and could engage with that story, which is, we know that he died. We give them a bit of backdrop about the army loved him. He wasn't loved by the Senate. Now that you've seen all of his story, what's your opinion? And people could actually write something in that would then go directly to the museum, and we would get that feedback. And that included feedback on the game, whether they liked that or not as well. And so this is the page that they'd actually see on the website if they then went to have the question. And you can see that it's in Dutch and in English. So the takeaways that we had from this, well, there were plenty of positives. And as you can imagine, there were, I don't like using the word negative, but constructive criticism that we received that we could use for the future to help us. So first off, it was quite clear that a game like this could be useful for the education team, and that the museum wished to develop more digital, in its broadest sense, offerings for different age groups. We were able, by having a game like this, to collect data that gave us more information about how our users were using and enjoying the exhibition than we could gain simply from the current methods of collecting data from them. So we had aimed it actually at teenagers, but it was quite clear that we hadn't pitched that at quite the right level, because the teenagers didn't find the game as a game mechanism engaging enough for them. And they felt that it distracted them slightly from looking at the exhibition. But actually, it worked very well with younger demographics. So we had a number of families come in, parents with younger children. They did play the game, and the children really liked it as a way of helping them to look at the objects and to understand how those, things about the objects that they hadn't realised before. So that was a positive, that we were reaching a new audience that we hadn't expected to. And so the result of this is that you have got people experiencing the exhibition in a new way. It was creating a shared learning experience, particularly in the case of those parents and children with one another. Disadvantages, I've already mentioned one of them, the fact that the older participants didn't find it so engaging. There were some people who felt that it created a bit of loss of independence because they felt the need to play the game to experience the exhibition and that they couldn't necessarily experience the exhibition without it. And also we made a choice to focus on certain aspects, and that was subjective. So why did we make those choices? Was that the best choice? These were things that we could have thought about more deeply and would do with upon reflection. And of course, that aspect of how do you deal with multiple groups playing at once in a narrow space? I mean, these are the practicalities of playing a game in a museum space when it's indoors. So lots of takeaways. And the initial objective, we wanted to experiment with new ways of playing in a museum space. We feel we did that. That's good. We felt that we had created with the first game an opportunity to do something fun in 3D that said something about Domitian and its storytelling. That was generally quite popular too. And we didn't hit those audiences we'd intended to, but we did hit audiences. We also created something that is now a digital legacy for that exhibition and that story that we wanted to tell. And we have that game shortly be archived. So we'll be able to keep it and we'll be able to keep the material from that. And this development of new educational content, this is something, of course, as we all know, that the heritage sector is doing much more prominently now, which is creating a digital footprint and a big chance to improve. So this leads us to phase 2, Rome Quest, a much lighter game for the phone and for the user. So what's the aims of phase 2? So we want this to be fun and educational as well, of course, but different mechanics from the first one. This time it's much more about puzzle solving, and we decided we want to make it feel like a treasure hunt through the city of Rome. So you travel around on a certain route, you experience the ancient heritage within contemporary landscape, and the idea is we promote this idea of community heritage, that people feel invested in the heritage around. That's the goal for this project. We also wanted to create slightly different versions to cater to different audiences. So the audience that's really into the treasure hunt side of it and speed and wants to win, there's one way you can do it against the clock. And we also have a table of leaders at the end in terms of how fast do you do it, how many points do you score. That translates into sesterces that can make you either, the bottom rung gladiator or the emperor of Rome, depending on where you are. And you can pick your own name and you can pick your own character. So we're creating that sort of competition aspect. But there are those that actually just want to enjoy going on the hunt and not worrying about the time aspect. So that is a possibility as well. And if the testing is successful for this game, then we're thinking, well, why not do other tours of Rome that focus on other emperors or other periods of history for Rome? Why only Rome? Why does it have to be just that city? I mean, by coincidence, Rome was the city for us because of the Domitian project, but there's no reason why we couldn't do something in Amsterdam or another city in Italy. We don't have to give Rome primacy here, just because that's where we are at the moment. And ultimately, we want to be engaging new audiences with heritage. So those people who are gamers first before they'll want to go to a museum, can we reach these audiences? That's the question. So here are our 4 tours that we have, because we felt that it would make it too long if we took you all through Domitian's Rome, just in terms of how long it takes to walk that part of the city. So with one tour, we start in Piazza Navona from Domitian Stadium, and that will take you all the way to the capital. And I should also say the reason why we did that as with the Capitol Museum as being the central point, is because initially we had wanted to use this bit of the game to sort of launch at the same time that the exhibition was in the Capitol Museums, so that you could always start or end where the exhibition was. That hasn't worked out, but it doesn't make the tour any less valid. So that's the first tour. And then the second one would be if you started from that piazza by the Capitol Museum and then went all the way to the Arch of Titus by the Circus Maximus. Right. So it's not, then they've got 2 relatively short distances that are manageable within an hour if you want to, with various stops along the way. And we have, as mentioned, we've got the timed version and the non-timed version. These are some of the stops that feature on the first tour. You can see there's a number of them there, and each stop coincides with something that has survived from Domitian's period that's just there in the streets. For example, I can't remember where it is, but there's like a foot of one of the, I think it's one of the statues from the Isis temple that's just there on a corner in a street as you're walking from Piazza Navona through the Campo di Fiori, I think. This is where Aurora will correct me when if I'm making any terrible mistakes here at the end. The types of questions that we pose, we want to focus on the visual aspects. So the idea is that you cannot answer this question unless you're physically in the space. Now, of course, there are photos online where you might be able to answer some of these questions, but we've deliberately tried to make the questions focus on something visual that's quite hard to then find on the internet, because nobody wants to take a photo of this particular bit of an inscription or something like that. And we want, with these questions, to create learning opportunities, with the idea being that at the very least, it's fun to look for it, and then subconsciously you take in some information about what you've seen. Or on a more conscious level, there's opportunities in the game to learn more about what you've just seen, if you wish to do that. And then, of course, we aim to reward the player for the speed and accuracy of their answers, depending on which version they play. So here, for example, you're in Piazza Navona. You can see that you've chosen the role of Camillus, number 7,774. This is we're very optimistic here about how many Camilli will appear in the game. You're 7 seconds in. You've already got 99,000 sesterces, so you're doing quite well. And then you're told here that in Piazza Navona, it was once Domitian's athletic stadium. You can still see the shape of it today. Head for the Fountain of the Four Rivers, which was designed by Bernini. And at the centre, you'll see this obelisk that was originally from Domitian's temple to Isis. And then you're asked to find the cartouche of Domitian's name, basically. And then you have to say, having found this cartouche, where is it? And then you get, you're either wrong or you're right. So then we thought about how to navigate it, because doing GPS and building that into the game can be quite complicated. So we thought we would do it old school with a map. And this map was designed, it took Maurizio hours to do this map, hours and hours, and he's created something very beautiful for it, which I'll just show you quickly. There it is. That's the lovely map he's created for us. And we also included photos as an aid to help you find certain locations. And these photos, of course, again, it's another way of highlighting that ancient heritage alongside the modern and that continuity with the past. And we also felt that we wanted people to have the opportunity to play this again at home if they wanted to, because in all of our experience to date, people did also want to play some of these mini games at home. So if you had the photo that was released having come to the location, you could look back again at the photos afterwards. You could take your own photos within the game itself. We also have built that into it. There's that map. Here's an example of the photos, just so you know you're in the right place. Question that appears behind it. Unsurprisingly, we had them go to the Pantheon at one point, and to learn about the fact that actually Domitian at one point put his name on this before Hadrianus restored it and put Agrippa back there. And then we've even got, in the credits itself, we talk a little bit about the type of story that we wanted to create. So then finally, as I sort of head towards this conclusion now, what are our next steps? Because we've not yet launched the game, but it is, with the exception of having the Italian translation built into it, which will shortly be done, we are ready to go, right? And we are very boldly going to put it out there before we've done the testing, which is the wrong way to do it, but it's been delayed so long for various reasons that we thought, let's just get it out there, and we'll almost use the game itself for our alpha testing, with the idea being that the next project becomes where we ultimately want to go with this kind of concept. Right. So we'll get it out there. We would also like to do testing. So in addition to the general public who will sort of use it and give us feedback, we want to do specific testing with the British School at Rome, and with the Dutch Institute at Rome, because there are a number of students there who, with whom we could do some masterclasses on digital heritage, gaming, etc. And they'll give us different perspectives, because we obviously, in Rome, we've got our Italian audience, but we've also got the international market to be thinking about. And then in terms of testing with the public, this will be really good to see what sort of feedback we get. Are the mechanics working? Should we be using other alternative game mechanics with them? And then ultimately, we could expand the game to include other tours, Tour Augustus's Rome, Tour Rome of the Renaissance, that sort of thing. And then ultimately, one side question, and this is a much bigger question for how we do gaming in general, which is sustainability, because of course, technology moves on. And if you can't always get funding, if you can't always get that next grant, how do we ensure the sustainability of a game and a gaming models and where we want to go in terms of development? And I've just put there as a sort of side note, now that I'm at the University of Amsterdam, there might be a possibility of setting up a foundation that would allow us to work on educational game projects, with the idea being that if each game can generate some income, that income can then be put back into not only the sustainability of that game, but developing the next game. Now, is that a model that can actually work going forwards? And my colleague Maurizio has a lot more experience in terms of the business model aspect of gaming. So thank you very much for your attention, and we welcome questions. But you can also ask Maurizio questions directly in Italian, of course, because Maurizio, just to clarify, is our game, is one of the developers, but also the game programmer alongside Samantha. And so you could, I suppose, we also ask you questions, Samantha, if you want to. Yeah. And then Aurora, wherever
The question was that, yeah, it's really interesting to see, it's about the setting, and it's really interesting to see that you've decided to set it in classical Rome. But according to you and Aurora and Maurizio, what are other periods of the history of Rome that might be of interest to the general public?
Very good question. Yeah. Oh, okay. So my first reaction, and I'll let the others speak as well, is from a personal side of things, I would love the Suetonius's emperors to all feature. So that would be my first thing. But I would also want Trajan to be in there, and I want Hadrian to be in there, because those would be two great Roman emperors. All of them, basically. Yeah. But I'm also thinking about the people who love playing Assassin's Creed. And I'm thinking that absolutely, can we go down that route? And then I'm thinking of the Da Vinci Code and the fact that the book that is set, is it Angels and Demons? Yeah, and that's where I was like, this is basically a treasure hunt, but with more gore than we want to put in our game. And those are the periods where I'm already thinking of how this could work. But Aurora, what are your thoughts?
Ci piacerebbe allargare l'ottica romana a tutti gli imperatori, ma sono molti, quindi forse a un certo punto dovremo fare piccoli periodi compressi. Per il resto della storia romana il barocco ha un fascino immenso sul turismo, sui turisti che visitano Roma, quindi anche pensare a personaggi, caratteri. Il Papa potrebbe essere un personaggio, Caravaggio che gira per Roma, cioè si potrebbero trovare personaggi iconici, come può essere iconico un imperatore, anche femminili, e svilupparlo su quella falsariga di un personaggio che ha un impatto sulla città di Roma, nei monumenti, in quello che sono i quadri, l'arte, quello che si può visitare, e quindi trasformarlo in un gioco.